He has been the face of TV Ontario for more than 25 years. Welcome Steve Paikin to Algonquin College's waterfront campus in Pembroke tonight in conversation with about his new book, Bill Davis. Welcome to Pembroke.
Thank you very much.
Visit.
Great to be here. I know, ridiculous that I've been on this earth 56 years and this is my first visit to Pembroke.
Well, it's taking you a
long overdue.
Long time to get here, but
I heard some
certainly...
tisk over here. That was, yes. Well, finally made it. Finally.
Well, it's the right time for you to be here. This college and the Ontario College system celebrating 50 great years, and of course, the man who brought us the Ontario College system, Bill Davis, the former Ontario Premier, who you have written a book about. And I want to talk a lot about that book tonight, but before we get there, let's just talk about those 25 great years at TVO. And you've been at the anchor desk, now the agenda. What's it been like having such a great view of Queen's Park?
It's a beautiful thing to get up every day and go to work and know that you're going to learn something new. I mean, who wouldn't want a job like that? Is that wonderful? And that's what it's been like. Now, mind you, 5 different programs, and when I started the job, there was no such thing as email. And now, of course, you know, I've tweeted 25,000 times, and I do a program on television, and I write blogs for the website, and, you know, it's a completely different world right now. And I've done... Does the fact I've done 5 different programs mean I can't really hold on to a job properly, or does it mean things have changed? I don't know. But the job has completely changed from when I started it back in 1992, and it's just been, it's been delightful, actually, to go to work every day and learn something new.
And you owe a great deal of credit to Bill Davis because he started up TVO.
Bill Davis created TVO and never fails to remind me that had it not been for him, I'd have been unemployed the last 25 years. Yeah.
And it probably gave you an advantage when you finally convinced him that someone needs to tell his story. That was a tough task, wasn't it?
I thought it would be a bigger advantage than it turned out to be. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Davis retired from public life 31 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And over the years, I sort of dropped hints with him that, have you ever thought about doing your memoirs, or have you ever thought about cooperating with an author to have your story told? And he sort of never showed much interest. And one day, I think this is probably 10 years ago, I sent him an email saying, you know, I just read a really interesting book about Leslie Frost, 2 premiers before him. And I said, you know, you were mentioned here, you were mentioned here, you were mentioned here. I told the story about this, that, and the other thing. And it was a pretty good book, you know. Does it give you any ideas? Hint, hint, hint. And he emailed me back and he said, Stephen, I think you'd agree that if we ever do this book project, my book will have to be longer than Leslie Frost's book because my premiership was longer than his. Ha, ha, ha. So he drops these little jokes along the way, but to no avail for the longest time. I know my wife called him probably 3 or 4 years ago. He would have been 82 or 3 at the time, and she said, you know, Mr. Davis, my husband isn't getting any younger. You really may want to look into this. And then finally, a couple of years ago, I don't know how many people in this room here remember a guy by the name of Claire Hoy. Does that name ring any bells? I see some heads nodding. Claire was a very tough, small-C conservative columnist, I think at the end for the Toronto Sun, and he wasn't much of a Bill Davis fan. He thought Davis was too wet, too mushy, too much of a progressive conservative and not enough of a small-C conservative. And he wrote in the late 1980s a pretty tough book about Mr. Davis. If I can use, I guess, a philosophical comparison, it was a bit Hobbesian. It was nasty, brutish, and short. But I always thought that there was a rather ungenerous look at the Davis years and that he deserved better than that. So I think about 2.5, 3 years ago, I finally said to Mr. Davis when I saw him somewhere, are you really going to give Claire Hoy the last word on your life? And the next day I got a call from his secretary saying, Mr. Davis would like to see you at his house in Brampton sometime in the next few days. And from there, we went on.
And what came out of that is this book, Bill Davis, Nation Builder, and Not So Bland After All.
Yes.
Great title, by the way, but how did you come to that title?
Well, that title, I think, sums up the 2 most fascinating things about Bill Davis. Nation Builder, because he was part of an indispensable group of politicians who gave us the Canadian Constitution repatriated and a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And this is something that Canadian politicians had been trying to do for decades and decades and always failed. And in fact, he was part of an effort when he first became Premier in 1971 that tried to repatriate the Constitution, and they thought they had a deal, and again at the 11th hour it broke down. I don't want to overdo his contribution to that. There's no question Pierre Trudeau drove the bus that gave us the Constitution. But Bill Davis was there in the catbird seat, and there's a story in this book told for the first time ever about a private phone call he made to Pierre Trudeau at a very key moment in all of the negotiations. And the contents of that call were such that had it not happened, and had Bill Davis not said to Pierre Trudeau what he said, I'm convinced the whole thing would have fallen apart. He got Pierre Trudeau to put water in his wine, which made the thing happen. And he never got enough credit for doing that, and so I hope this book rectifies that situation. And not so bland after all is a reference to the fact that one day, during a scrum at Queen's Park, there was a reporter who said to Mr. Davis, after he had yet another one of his scrums, which, I mean, do you remember him when he was Premier, how he used to do this? He'd ask a question, 3 minutes later he'd come around to his answer, he'd circumlocute it all over the place, and the reporters would all look at each other and say, what did he say? What did he say? Somebody asked him, why is your government so bland? And he just simply answered, bland works. And that was, in a way, his calling card. He liked to try to take the steam out of issues. You know, when they heated up too much, he liked to try to keep the temperature down. He was a great compromiser. And so that's what the not so bland after all actually is a reference to the fact that while he may have thought he ran a bland government, the issues he dealt with were absolutely crucial to the future of the province and the country. And he had some very huge issues to deal with during his time. He may have been a bit of a bland personality himself, but there was nothing bland about the times.
And having read the book, I would agree with that. A wonderful Ontario history lesson. You know, and I want to take us back to the start of the book because Bill Davis actually got into politics when he was 29 years of age.
Very young.
Very young. And the premiership almost didn't happen because of personal tragedy. He lost his wife with 4 children under the age of 6.
Never mind the premiership. His whole political career almost didn't happen. He won election for the first time in '59, and it was only a few years later that his wife and the mother of his 4 children died. I think she was 31 or 32.
Very young.
And he went to John Robarts, who incidentally was born 100 years ago yesterday. That's right. Yeah, John Robarts would have been 100 years old yesterday. And he went to Mr. Robarts and he said, I don't think I can go on. I think I have to quit. I've got these 4 little kids and they don't have a mother, and I can't be traipsing all over Ontario. And Robarts, who was a very wise and sage kind of leader, said to him, now let's just hold on a second. Let's see if we can get your life a little better organized. And they did. And it allowed, actually Robarts did something fascinating. I haven't seen this happen in politics in a long, long time. When he became premier, he was also at the same time the education minister. So when he became premier, he actually held on to the education portfolio for almost a year. And he did that because he wanted to give Bill Davis time to get his life organized so that when it was, he could make Davis the education minister. And that's what happened. Mr. Davis got his life organized. They had a governess come over from England, took care of the kids. Interestingly enough, someone whom he had known since he was a kid from life at his cottage in Georgian Bay was a woman he suddenly looked at differently. And he remarried. They had a 5th child. The book is dedicated to her, Kathleen Davis, because I'm convinced that without her, none of what he achieved would have been possible. She is the unsung hero of his great achievements. And he became a great education minister and then premier for 14 years.
Just want to talk a little bit about John Robarts. If you want a contradiction in personalities, Robarts versus Davis.
Clearly.
Talk about the 2 different chairman of the board,
Well,
Bland Billy.
I don't know how graphic you want me to get here, but the reality
Not
is...
too graphic,
okay,
it's a family show.
It's a family show. John Robarts loved to party. Let me put it this way. In terms of politics, they were both progressive conservatives, right? They were not hard ideological types. They were both progressive conservatives, moderate men. Robarts was sort of the guy who ushered in the beginnings of really modern Ontario, and Bill Davis then picked up the mantle and took it the next step. But in terms of their personal lives, nothing at all similar. Robarts loved to go to Yorkville, loved to go to the old Bombay Bicycle Club, downtown Toronto, party the night away. He could stay out till 1 or 2 in the morning going to see jazz. show up for work at 8 o'clock the next morning, no harm done. He had an amazing, strong constitution, personal constitution. Bill Davis went home to Brampton every night, slept in his own bed. John Robarts stayed at the Westbury Hotel.
That's the family part.
Fill in the blanks yourself. I mean, he had a troubled marriage. He was from London, Ontario. He asked his wife to move the family to Toronto, where he was obviously going to be as premier 6, maybe even sometimes 7 days a week. She didn't want to. And John Robarts was not a guy who should have been left to his own devices in Toronto without his wife and kids because, anyway, took a strain on his marriage. He eventually got a divorce.
And if you're wondering about Steve's knowledge of John Robarts, he's also written a book about that former premier. May 21st, 1965 is a very important day for this particular institution. It is the day that the Colleges Act is introduced by, at that time, Education Minister Bill Davis. What a historic time that was as we celebrate our 50th anniversary.
Ontario was going through, you have to put it in the context of the times. The 1960s were just unbelievable for Ontario. I mean, it was go, go, go. The biggest problem the Robarts government had was how quickly can we spend this gusher of money that's coming into our coffers. And so with that, we got the entire community college system, I think 4 or 5 or 6 new universities. I mean, the list of things that go, more nuclear power plants, Go Transit, Confederation of Tomorrow Conference on the future of the country. There were just an innumerable number of new institutions built in the province at the time. TVO, OISE, Ontario Institute for Studies and Education, and Bill Davis's job was to usher in the creation of the new community college system. How many students did you have at Algonquin 50 years ago?
16 when we started at this campus.
16.
And now about 1,000.
1,000 now. Okay. So was it a success, the college system? I think it probably was. Centennial College in Toronto was the first. I think they had the same thing, maybe 100 students or something like that. They got 20,000 today. Anyway, it's been an enormous, I think if you ask people, they will say, interestingly enough, that Mr. Davis's greatest accomplishment in 25 years in public life may have happened even before he was premier. And that is the establishment of the college system, which was not easy to do, but they got it done, and it has truly stood the test of time.
And he's still very proud of it. You allude to it in the book. He also has strong opinions of what colleges should be.
And shouldn't be.
Yes.
He is not a big fan of colleges trying to be universities. He really does see a distinction between the mission of universities and the mission of community colleges. And he is actually, this may or may not surprise you, he's on the phone to Kathleen Wynne probably once every 4 or 5 months about something. They have a very close relationship. And one of the things that he has tried to get her to not do is to green light a lot of the colleges that want to become universities. He sees these two things as very separate pillars in the education system that can cooperate more and can recognize one another's credentials. And, I tell you what, one of the biggest cohorts of people going to university these days are people who are going from college to university and vice versa. People going from university into college now. They've got their academic training and now they want to get more practical training. So he sees these as very distinct entities and wants them to stay that way.
And when Bill Davis is education minister, it's hard to imagine now, but the education ministry has the bulk of the budget, not healthcare.
Education then was like health today. I think Bill Davis, when he was Minister of Education and colleges and universities, spent probably half the budget. And when he ran for the leadership, actually, in 1971, this turned into a very big controversial thing. He sort of had a bit of a target on him from that because some of the other candidates were sort of, they were kind of accusing him of spending money willy-nilly without any regard to where it was going to. But again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and I think we have one of the most outstanding post-secondary systems in the world today.
So John Robarts decides it's time to leave politics. We're now into, and December 12th is the day that Bill Davis says, I'm going to run for the PC leadership. He goes in as the front runner, and he almost blew it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he almost blew it for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was so darn loyal to Robarts that while all the other candidates were already getting their organizations in place and fundraising and, getting their resources organized, Mr. Davis's view was, John Robarts is still the premier, and it will look disloyal of me to start organizing before I think his line was, the man's still in the chair. And as long as that man is still in the chair, I'm his education minister, nothing more. What ended up happening was he gave a big advantage to his competitors, including the people of the back rooms who would turn into what has been known as the Big Blue Machine. Bill Davis wasn't actually the guy who created the Big Blue Machine. It was his chief competitor, Alan Lawrence. They all went to work for him. And Lawrence wasn't nearly the candidate that Davis was, and yet
44 votes.
44 votes. At whatever it was, 2 o'clock in the morning, after 4 ballots at Maple Leaf Gardens, Davis wins by 44 votes. And I often wonder, how would the course of Ontario history be different if 23 delegates had voted a different way at that convention? But they didn't, and he won.
And he won, and then he was sworn in as premier
Yep.
in 1971.
Yep.
And when John Robarts is leaving the office, he says, Bill, I've left you in great shape except 2 little things.
2 little things, yeah.
Spadina and the bishop's brief.
Right. Yeah. That was a joke because he basically left 2 huge steaming piles of turd behind for Bill Davis to handle. The bishop's brief was the Roman Catholic schools question. It had obviously been the case since Confederation that part of the deal was Protestant schools in Quebec get public funding, and in return, Catholic schools in Ontario get public funding. But Ontario had always interpreted that to mean only common schools, which meant only till grade 8. Davis, under Robarts, as education minister, extended it to grade 10, and the Catholics wanted it extended all the way to the end of high school. Davis had to make a decision. He got lobbied like hell during that 71 campaign. Do I extend it all the way to the end or not? And the other thing was the Spadina Expressway, of course. There was this big contingent in Toronto that wanted to build an expressway from the northwest part of the city right through downtown, and there was an enormous stink raised in downtown Toronto. People in Forest Hill, people in Rosedale, in the Annex, some well-heeled neighborhoods that didn't want to see this highway come through their neighborhoods. Well, what did he do? He did 2 things that established almost right away that there's a new sheriff in town. It's not going to be like John Robarts. I'm going to be a fresh face with a new approach. He cancels the Spadina Expressway entirely, which shows he's got some pretty green credentials, right? He makes this great speech in the legislature that, Mr. Speaker, if we're trying to build a transportation system for the car, the Spadina Expressway is a great place to start, but if we want to build cities for people, the Spadina Expressway is a great place to stop. So he cancels it and does 2 things, burnishes his own green credentials and kills the NDP in the City of Toronto, because that takes their biggest issue away from them politically. On the separate school thing, he thinks about it, he thinks about it, he thinks about it, and at the end of the day, he says, not going to do it. End of grade 10, period, full stop. Oh, and incidentally, we're going to have an election. And the Tory core, remember, this is Ontario of 45 years ago, not Ontario of today. Ontario is a very waspy orange place back then. I don't say that as a negative thing, that's the way it was. And the Tory core of Ontario was very happy to see Bill Davis stick it to the Catholics. And when election time came in October 21st, I think, 1971, here comes Bill Davis in with a bigger majority government than he inherited from John Robarts.
I love your analogy, baseball. You said it was like Robarts handing it to him with the bases loaded in the 9th inning. He was the starting pitcher, Robarts. He left the game. There was nobody out. Here, Bill, go deal with this.
Yeah, you be the
don't lose
closer
the
to come
game.
in and finish this game, which he did, and he got it done.
The other
and
thing
can I interrupt long
Yes.
enough to say, and one of the guys who was part of both the Robarts government and the Davis government was a guy named Paul Yakubuski,
Yes.
whom you will all remember. And his son John is back there, who is the MPP, your MPP today. And I just want to take this moment to say hi to John and to thank him for coming out tonight. That's really nice of you. I know how busy you guys are, so good for you. Thank you.
October 21st, 1971, Bill Davis actually wins his first election as a general election as the premier, defeats a couple of very solid politicians in Liberal leader Bob Nixon and, of course, NDP's Stephen Lewis. That was quite a trifecta, wasn't it, at Queen's Park?
Look, I might have to plead guilty to nostalgia here, but I'm highly dubious that there was a better sort of top 3 ever in Ontario history. I mean, Davis, I think, is one of the most extraordinary, unparalleled politicians in Ontario history. Bob Nixon, his father was premier, came from a great 3 generations now in public life. His father was premier, Harry Nixon. Bob is his father was also the longest serving member of the legislature ever. Bob Nixon was in there for a long time. Bob Nixon was 4-time Ontario Liberal leader. That is unprecedented in North American political history. And he was there for a long time, and all those years in opposition eventually became Minister of Finance under David Peterson, and his daughter was a cabinet minister in Chrétien's government. So you got 3 generations there. And Stephen Lewis, I mean, what do you say? Stephen Lewis, one of the most brilliant orators you'd ever hear in your life, went on to become UN ambassador, runs this magnificent foundation that does so much great work for AIDS in Africa today. And yeah, the 3 of them, I mean, you probably could have sold tickets for question period. They were awfully darn good.
1975, Davis goes back to the polls. He wins, but again,
Barely.
yeah, it's just across the finish line in front of Nixon and Lewis. And it's the same kind of story. He has to actually make a late rally to keep the Conservative Party in power.
This is a shock. I mean, for all of the good things Davis did in his first year, it went right into the dumper right after that. Scandals, problems. I mean, I don't want to push this comparison too far, but today we have a premier who used to be education minister, who was a very good education minister, who inherited a difficult situation from her predecessor, who improved upon her predecessor's situation with her first win, a majority government, who almost immediately got into difficulties, who has had allegations and difficulties of scandals, who lost a by-election that for a seat that was safe and had been held by her party for 3 decades in Scarborough. And, the story's still ongoing, so we'll see where it ends up. Exact same story for Davis. All of those things I just said about Kathleen Wynne happened to Bill Davis. And when he went back to the polls in 75, trying to renew his mandate, and remember, the Liberals have been in power for a long time, the Tories had been in power for a long time. They'd been in power, I think, when Bill Davis took over for almost 3 decades. He goes to the polls, he's 10 points behind with a week to go. So everybody thinks it's over. And yet, because of the way the vote split, because he had a very strong last week, he had an amazing debate, which was, I'm telling you, the debate they had, Nixon and Davis, rivals anything you saw between Trump and Clinton. It was that vicious. And, strangely enough, on election night, he barely squeaks back in with a minority government and saves the silverware.
We're both old enough to remember jumping in the back seat of our parents' car, and seatbelts were a novelty.
Right.
You didn't have to wear them, you just liked the sound of the click.
Yep.
1976, January 1st, this was interesting to me. It was Bill Davis that brought in mandatory seatbelt legislation, but the story behind it is tragic.
Yeah, I'm not sure the name Eddie Goodman will mean anything to the people in this room, but Eddie Goodman was one of those great Tory backroom guys who really made his mark advising federal and provincial conservative leaders for, about 50 years, actually. He's a World War II veteran, World War II hero. And his daughter was driving, I think, from University of Western Ontario home to Toronto along the 401 one day. She got into a car accident, went through the windshield, her body was sent flying many, many meters, and she died. Young kid, 18, 19, whatever years old. And when Eddie found out about this, he said, her death is not going to happen in vain. Had she been wearing a seatbelt, she'd probably have walked away without a scratch. And so he lobbied the premier and lobbied and lobbied and lobbied, and they made it happen. And you are wearing your seatbelts today in the province of Ontario because a guy named Eddie Goodman lost his daughter and convinced the premier of Ontario that it ought to be mandatory. And I'm sure all of you in this room remember how controversial that was at the time. I mean, I was 16 years old or so when it happened, and I still remember the great controversies about how dare you impinge on my personal freedom. I'll wear my damn seatbelt if I want, and you can't make me do it. I mean, nobody thinks twice about it today, and we think about all the carnage that has been avoided because of this.
June 9, 1977, a premature election, only 2 years after Davis won the 75 vote. Part of it, though, is driven by the Parti Québécois gaining power in the province of Quebec, but it doesn't go very well.
No, Mr. Davis decides to get a bit cute here, and it turned around to bite him on the bum. Only 2 years into this minority parliament, he sees René Lévesque win this election, and he thinks, I need a stronger mandate to deal with the separatist threat of Quebec. And Ontarians think about that and say, isn't that the Prime Minister's job? Not really your job? So he wins a few more seats, but he still comes back with just a minority government. And he resolves at that point to do something quite interesting. He resolves at that point to serve the whole 4 years. No more monkey business, no more shenanigans. We're going to serve the whole 4 years. And the legislature, John, I hope your father would echo my interpretation of the way things went back then, but I have had people of all three parties from back at that time say that the legislature was a genuinely democratic institution back then, that the Conservatives may have been in power, but Davis consulted with the Liberals on some bills, with the NDP on some bills. It was a much more collegial institution where everybody on all sides of the House really felt like they were having input into the laws that were passed. And, I mean, it happened because Davis happened to be a very pragmatic, non-ideological, centrist kind of a politician who got along with everybody. So he could reach out to the left and get Stephen Lewis on side when he needed that support. He could reach out to the right and get Bob Nixon on side. Because remember, Nixon had a lot of seats in rural Ontario then, and on many issues was to the right of the Conservatives on some things. So that ability to reach out and find the sweet spot was one of Bill Davis's great strengths. And I don't think you'd see much of that today. I don't think it works that way today, but it worked that way back then.
And the afterthought in that is that 1980, first Quebec referendum, and Quebecers reject separatism. A few years later, it was a very different story with the vote. 1981, Davis wins another election. This time, though, it's 4 consecutive. First time that's happened in 67 years.
4 straight wins. 4 straight wins. He's the first premier since World War I to win 4 straight elections. And most importantly for him, he gets the majority back. And that was something that, he came in with a majority, and he was absolutely, in his gut and his heart, desperate to reclaim the majority, and he does. And after that, almost every, well, I'm exaggerating there, so many answers in question period started with, Mr. Speaker, given the realities of March the 19th, which was Bill Davis's way of saying, we've got the majority on this side right now, and we don't have to listen to you so much on the other side anymore. The realities of March 19th, we heard that a lot.
And I love the fact that anyone who did not bleed conservative blue was philosophically
Misguided.
Thank you.
right.
Philosophically misguided.
Can I tell you a little story about that?
Yes, please.
This doesn't go back very far. When Justin Trudeau was leader of the third place Liberal Party, this is obviously before the last federal election, he came to Brampton, and he asked for his father's great friend, Bill Davis, to introduce him, even though this was going to be a Liberal event in Brampton. And Mr. Davis, out of an affection for Pierre Trudeau, the memory of, and because he took Justin Trudeau to his first ever football game, which was a Grey Cup when Justin was, 6 or something, he agreed to do it. And he did a very nice introduction of Justin Trudeau. Remember, he's 85 years old at the time that he's doing this. He gave a very nice introduction about this young man whom he met when he was just a kid, and he does have a lot of energy and vim and vigor, and, he may be philosophically misguided, but he's a good man. That's Bill Davis's big line. So, last summer, for Bill Davis's 87th birthday, Justin Trudeau, they have a big party for him somewhere in Brampton. Justin Trudeau, now the Prime Minister, sends a video for the event and says, I'm so happy to wish a happy birthday to one of my favorite people and politicians, even though he's philosophically misguided. He sends his own words back at him. So they have a very affectionate relationship, the two of them.
The relationship between Bill Davis as Ontario's premier and another very powerful premier, Peter Lougheed in Alberta,
Yes.
is an interesting one. But in this piece, I don't remember this piece of history, so I thank you for writing about it. Suncor, and the $350 million investment made by
In
Ontario
1981.
in the middle of a recession is quite extraordinary, and Ontario taxpayers were not happy.
A little comparison here. Bill Davis and Peter Lougheed, both progressive conservative premiers, both played football, both premiers from 1971 to 1985, both won 4 elections. both conservatives, both friends, both great rivals. Bill Davis was Premier of Ontario. That was actually a big deal. Peter Lougheed was Premier of Alberta. Back then, Mr. Davis wouldn't like me saying this out loud, but he says, for goodness sakes, that's like being the mayor of London, Ontario today, okay? But, you know, Peter Lougheed had all the money, right? They had the oil coming in and the Heritage Fund, and, you know, they had a lot of money. You're quite right that 1981, there's the energy crisis. Mr. Davis decides that Ontario needs what he calls a window on the oil industry. And so he spends $350 million 1981 dollars. It's like $1 billion today to buy a piece of Suncor. John, do you want to tell us what the Tory core thought about the government of Ontario buying an oil company? Not too much. Much of Ontario went bananas over it. They thought, wait a second, you don't have money for our schools, you don't have enough money for healthcare, you don't have money for our hospitals, but you got money to buy an oil company? What's that all about? Well, there's sort of two ends to the story. I think on the one hand, a huge chunk of Ontario never really accepted the purchase. They thought it was a bad decision. Frank Miller, who was the treasurer of the day, offered to resign over it because he thought it was just not what the government ought to be doing. And I think when Bob Rae became premier, the shares were relatively undervalued, and so he sold them all at a huge loss. Had we held on to those shares, however, Ontario would be running no deficits at all over the last 25 years. I mean, the shares have split so many times, and the company has done so well, we'd have been deficit-free all this time. So, yeah, is there an argument saying the government probably shouldn't be in the gas-selling business? Yeah. On the other hand, had we kept the shares, would all of our, fiscal bottom lines be a lot better today? Also, yeah. Make your own judgment.
Sad part of Bill Davis's story is a man who was obviously somewhat of a big brother figure to him. John Robarts suffered a debilitating stroke, and a year later took his own life. And on March 1st, 1982, Bill Davis spoke at a memorial service, and by all accounts in your book, it was a very, very powerful eulogy, and Bill Davis let down his guard.
I talked to Janet Ecker about this because Janet, you may remember her, she was a conservative cabinet minister in Mike Harris's government, but she was the assistant press secretary for Bill Davis in his government. And she had to write the speech that he had to give in the legislature. I think Mr. Robarts died October 18th, 82, so the service would have been shortly thereafter. And he barely got through it. And this is a man who, as we've already discussed, has known his share of tragedy. But he loved Robarts. They were nothing alike, but he loved him. Robarts was a real mentor to him. Robarts is not that much older, 13 years older, I guess, than Mr. Davis. And when he gave the speech in the legislature to acknowledge Mr. Robarts' passing, and remember, it was a suicide, so it was extremely controversial. Mr. Robarts was just the kind of guy who was not prepared to live life, which, as we've already discussed, he loved to live. He was not prepared to live in a body that did not function. He couldn't go hunting anymore. He couldn't go sailing anymore, which he loved to do. He couldn't belt back the scotches anymore because one side of his body was numb and would dribble down the side of his cheek. He had a second marriage to a woman 28 years his junior. That obviously, his stroke and debilitation took a terrible toll on his marriage. And as a result, he just decided to end his life. He said, I'm not going to live like this anymore. And, there was a very memorable line at his funeral by Bishop Louis Garnsworthy, who said, ours is not to judge the method by which he has left this world. Ours is to pay respects to him and remember the good things that he did. And I know Mr. Davis obviously felt the same way.
1982, you touched on it off the top about the repatriation of the Constitution and Bill Davis's role in that, the secret phone call to Pierre Trudeau. That was really about the notwithstanding clause.
Yes.
And it's also the night that Quebec Premier René Lévesque called the Night of the Long Knives.
Yes.
Which he felt that the other premiers had collaborated behind his back. I'll let you pick up the story there.
Well, I think it's always been, it's always been a bit of a, look, Mr. Davis is not one of these people who believes that life is ever perfect. You know, you do the best you can. And I think he regretted the fact that the constitutional agreement that was signed that November day in 1981 in Ottawa didn't have Quebec's signature on it. You know, it was a separatist premier of Quebec. It's an open debate as to whether or not any deal could ever have accommodated a Quebec that wanted to leave Canada. Why would a separatist premier sign any document that was going to strengthen a united Canada? So it's an open discussion as to whether or not any deal would have been good enough for René Lévesque. Having said that, I know Mr. Davis felt a tinge of sadness that not all 10 premiers signed on. But having said that, he is a man who believes that politics is all about the art of the possible. And what was possible that November day in 1981 was 9 premiers and the federal government signing on to an agreement that I think if you look at public opinion polling has been maybe the most, well, it's probably Medicare #1 and the Constitution with the Charter of Rights #2, the most popular thing any government in Canadian history has ever done. And he was a huge part of it. And so I think he's entitled to take his victory laps on that. And, you know, I remember talking to Brian Mulrooney for the book, and Mr. Mulrooney's view was, you know, while he was upset about Quebec being left out of the original 1981 deal, he always felt that when Lévesque was out of there and a Federalist premier came in, quote unquote, we'd fix it. And of course, they almost did with Meech Lake. They almost got to an agreement over Meech Lake. But here we are, how many years? 35 years later? You know, the Charter is still a very highly prized and respected document in this country. And despite numerous, I guess, 2 or 3 more efforts to get Quebec's signature on the Constitution, it still hasn't quite happened. But the country ticks along.
That volley into federal politics also brought Davis's standing higher and some pressure to consider running federally.
A lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. Yeah. And of course, Joe Clark did go on and had a relatively short term as the prime minister. And the relationship between Clark and Davis, not always great.
You know what's interesting is that Bill Davis, above all else, is a party loyalist. And he didn't particularly like Joe Clark personally, and he didn't particularly respect Joe Clark's judgment politically, and he didn't think that Joe Clark made great decisions as a leader. And yet, this guy, you know, for all of the stories you've heard over the years about how Bill Davis undercut Joe Clark and didn't work for him, didn't help him become Prime Minister of Canada, it's just not true. I've gone back and looked at the record. I think it's fair to say that, I mean, okay, we all remember a little over a year ago, Kathleen Wynne doing event after event after event, dozens of events for Justin Trudeau to help him become Prime Minister. That's the most help any Ontario Premier has given to her federal leader since Bill Davis, both in '79 and once again in 1980, tried to help Joe Clark. You could argue Clark was not, I think Mr. Davis's expression at the time when the 1980 election results came in and Mr. Clark's prime ministership was ended after just 9 months, I think his answer was, popularity is clearly not transferable. All the work he did to try to get Joe Clark elected, at the end of the day, just went for naught. Clark was just, you know, he just was not the candidate that Pierre Trudeau was back then. But he's a loyalist, and he worked hard for Clark, but it didn't happen.
June 12, 1984 is a historic day in Ontario history. Bill Davis introduces full funding, the announcement for Catholic education. The part that is stunning to me from reading the book is that Betty Stevenson, who was the education minister at the time, has no idea he's about to make this announcement until only hours before he stands in the legislature and says, guess what? Full funding for Catholic schools. The education minister, how can she not know?
He didn't tell her because he knew she was opposed. And so what he did was he met very quietly with Cardinal Carter, G. Emmett Cardinal Carter, some of you may remember from back in the day, who was the senior-most Roman Catholic Church official in Canada, and in fact who'd had a whole history of educational experience himself, both in the province of Quebec and in Ontario. And they met frequently. And despite the fact that Bill Davis made that decision in 1971 not to extend full funding to the separate school system, Cardinal Carter and Mr. Davis kept their doors open. And they met frequently, and Cardinal Carter kept making his case, and Mr. Davis kept listening. Such a key thing for politicians, eh? Listen, keep the door open. And eventually, many of Mr. Davis's friends have told me that he felt guilty. A little part of him felt guilty about winning that 71 election on the backs of the Catholic schools funding issue. And so that when an opportunity to, in his view, rectify that came along, he finally took it. And that would have been June 12, 1984. Once again, though, not a decision without controversy. You say, not so bland after all? No kidding. I mean, there was great antipathy within, again, the Progressive Conservative Party base to extend full public funding to separate schools. People went back and read Bill Davis's speeches from 1971 in which he said this would fracture the public school system. This will take money away from the secular public school system that they'll need. This will result in the closing of schools in the public school system and increase sectarian strife in the province of Ontario. They read all those speeches of his from 13 years earlier back to him, but he saw something else. He saw an Ontario that was becoming increasingly multicultural, that was becoming increasingly Catholic. A lot of those new immigrants were coming from the Philippines and Portugal and Italy, and Ontario was becoming increasingly Catholic. And I don't say he made the decision for political reasons, but it could not have escaped his eyes to see all of these new Catholic citizens in Ontario who had always voted Liberal in the past, and he thought, well, maybe there's an entree for the PC party among these folks as well. And so he made the announcement to do it. Of course, he retired before he actually had a chance to implement it.
I suspect it was planned, though, the retirement. Was he do you think?
It's a wonderful question, and I'm not sure. Roy McMurtry, who was his Attorney General, told me that in 1981, after winning that 81 election and getting his majority back, that Mr. Davis said to him on election night, or shortly thereafter, this is going to be my last go at it. So, there was a hunch that he wasn't going to run again, that now that he reclaimed his majority, he would go off into the sunset and, at the age of whatever he was then, 54 or 5, leave public life after 25 years and go finally start to cash in the private sector. But you saw from that clip that we played off the top, everybody, when he walked into Queen's Park that day after Thanksgiving in 1984, everybody thought he was calling an election. His polling numbers were through the roof. He was so popular. How would you not exploit that popularity by going back to the polls, winning, and, hanging around for a couple of years, and then leaving? And he didn't.
Frank Miller became his successor.
Mm-hmm. Can I say why he didn't?
Yeah, go ahead.
He didn't because...
I didn't know that was a pregnant pause. I apologize for that.
No, not at all. It just occurred to me as I was halfway through that, I thought maybe I should just finish that story. He knew that the first question he'd be asked at that press conference, calling an election, would be, Mr. Davis, you're calling this election. Do you pledge to serve the whole term? And he knew he didn't want to. He knew he'd had enough. He knew that he couldn't look at the people of Ontario and say with a straight face, yes, I will serve the whole term. He couldn't lie. Think about that for a second. A politician who couldn't lie to the people in a way in a way in which he refused to exploit his own personal popularity for what clearly would have been a slam dunk for his party. He wouldn't, and he couldn't do it. And that's why he stepped down.
And he steps down, and Frank Miller, who Bill Davis encourages to run, Frank Miller's actually planning his retirement announcement and pulls back, but he's not even in the cabinet meeting the day Davis advises all of cabinet, I'm packing it in. That sounds kind of odd.
You won't get Mr. Davis to admit that he made many mistakes in public life. But one mistake, if you push him a little bit, he will be prepared to make, is a conversation he had at his home with Frank Miller, I think in the fall or maybe summer of 1984, in which Miller comes to his home in Brampton and says, I've been here since 1971. I've had a great time. You and I agree on nothing. You're the guy who wants to buy oil companies. I'm sort of the original common sense revolutionary before Mike Harris came along. I respect you, but I got to go. I've had enough. And Mr. Davis says to Frank Miller, Frank, don't leave yet. I may not be around for much longer. And so Frank doesn't. He sticks around. Davis retires, Miller wins, leads the party into a disastrous election campaign. Interestingly enough, runs the worst campaign I think I ever saw in Ontario political history, and still comes first. Okay?
But just barely.
Just barely, but he comes first. He runs a terrible campaign and he still wins the most number of seats, which goes to show you how popular the PC party still was, how deep its roots were, what good shape Mr. Davis left the party in, that the guy who ran the campaign actually did a bad job of it and yet still came first. Mr. Davis now thinks if he had his time back, he might have said to Frank Miller, Frank, you want to retire? God bless. Because probably any one of the other three people who ran to replace Mr. Davis might have been able to hang on to power.
And David Peterson and Bob Rae pooled together to topple the government, and that's the end of 42 years of governing for the Tories.
Not a bad run.
Pretty good
42
run.
straight years, not a bad run.
But I just want to slide this in. Stephen Lewis went to Bob Nixon in one of the early elections that Bill Davis won and wanted to do the same sort of coalition on the non-confidence vote, but Nixon wouldn't do it.
Okay, I'm going to get really in the weeds here. Hang in there with me here, okay? Here's the story. 1985 election, the Conservatives under Miller come first, 52 seats. The Liberals under David Peterson come second, 48 seats, but actually get more votes. So fewer seats, but more votes. Bob Rae's the kingmaker. He's in third place with 25 seats, and he has to decide what to do. Now, you know the tradition in Canadian politics is the third place party supports the first place party and props them up. Right? That's what Jack Layton did for Stephen Harper. That's what David Lewis did for Pierre Trudeau. That's kind of the way it works. Except Bob Rae gets this idea where he says, we're going to do something different this time. These guys have been in for 42 straight years. So, you know what? Both you guys, Liberals and Conservatives, show me the love. Show me the love. Who's going to do more of what we want? So they have these lengthy negotiations, and ultimately, Bob Rae makes the decision to make David Peterson premier. So you got the second place guy who actually becomes premier, propped up by the third place party, Bob Rae. You are right. 10 years earlier, that same scenario presented itself. Remember, Davis wins the minority government in 75, barely ahead of the Liberals and the NDP. And same situation. Stephen Lewis and one of his MPPs drives out to Bob Nixon's farm in Brant, Ontario, has a conversation with him and says, how about we get together on this? And they thought about it for a little while, they talked about it a little bit, and at the end of the day, Bob Nixon just felt, I can't bring my caucus on board. They'll kill me. they'll just never go for it. So it doesn't happen, and as a result, Tories stayed in power for another 10 years.
So Bill Davis might have been, as you suggest, bland in maybe his personality, but he also had a good sense of humor. And I just want to read one quick excerpt as we finish up here from page 447 of your book. And of course, Sean Conway, who was our MPP here for many years, and this is his quote, so I don't mind, I would not embarrass him by reading this. It says, in January 1980, Conway recalls having his wisdom teeth taken out and looking like George Chevallo there in a fight with Muhammad Ali. While he was recovering at home, there was a knock on the door. A postman presented him with a letter via special delivery. Conway glanced at the letter, which had the Office of the Premier of Ontario logo emblazoned on it. He opened the letter to see the following message revealed, in quotations. I wish I could be there with you to see the big mouth of the legislature shut down for just one day. Directly from Bill Davis, which I think is a great way to end this interview and say Bill Davis was not so bland after all.
Not so bland after all, that's right. That's absolutely right.
Thank you so much for being here,
Jamie,
Steve.
thank you so much. Just wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Steve Paikin, longtime host of The Agenda on TVO, founded by Premier Bill Davis. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on In Conversation With. I'm Jamie Bramberger. Good night from Algonquin College.